Just imagine, you are suddenly transformed into a cute puppy and meet the girl you like, who is passionate about dogs and therefore treats you very well. Well, that's exactly the dilemma Pochita finds himself in when he suddenly wakes up on a cold, rainy day, completely unaware of what's going on or how he got there. And he's picked up by Karen, his classmate and first love, who declares that from today onward he is now her pet, as she carries a confused Pochita back to her house. When they finally arrive there, however, Pochita attempts to thank his crush for saving him from the rain but can't seem to open his mouth to speak. And when he then finds himself in the bathroom with Karen moments later, the heavenly sights before his eyes convince him that he's died and gone to heaven. And although Pochita tries to be a gentleman by averting his gaze, Karen proves far too beautiful for the male chimp brain to resist. But when Pochita then suddenly sees his own reflection in the mirror, he finally realizes that he's somehow become a dog. And as the lucky mutt tries to make sense of this new plot-filled reality, Karen suddenly begins shouting with joy at just how adorable she finds her new puppy. And in an even more shocking turn of events, she begins nibbling and licking Pochita's nose. And Pochita himself has a similar thought as he realizes that the woman he's admired all these years is actually just a weirdo. After their bath, Karen tries to command Pochita to sit, which he refuses to do as he just doesn't want to accept that he's now her dog. But when he looks at her adorable face, his knees buckle, and he finds himself obeying his new owner's command, much to her pleasure. And when she then extends her hand and asks for his paw in return, Pochita thinks back to how, as a human, he could never have dreamt of ever holding Karen's hand. And as he places his tiny paw into her hand, Pochita begins to think that perhaps being Karen's dog isn't such a bad thing after all. Karen, on the other paw, is ecstatic at this seemingly genius dog who's able to learn new tricks in a matter of seconds, while Pochita can't help but wonder if this new life is a punishment from the gods or a blessing. The next day, Pochita attempts to escape Karen's house so he can go home and look for clues as to how he ended up turning into a dog. But he's unfortunately too short to reach the handle and is eventually caught by Karen, who thinks he's begging to go on a walk. And when Karen then puts a collar on him, he can't help but feel humiliated, but he also can't complain about the great view he's getting. Once outside, however, Pochita feels incredibly uncomfortable by the fact that he has to walk on all fours in public like some weirdo, but Karen seems to be having a blast. Until suddenly, a baseball comes flying towards Karen, and Pochita pulls his leash to drag her out of the way just in time, and the lucky mutt somehow ends up with his head where mine should be. In response, Karen calls Pochita a bad boy and says that that area is reserved for humans, but she's still grateful that he saved her and attempts to lick his nose as a thank you because that's what normal people do. But she's thankfully interrupted by the kids who hit the baseball and frightens them away as she returns it. Suddenly, Pochita feels the need to go number one, but he refuses to do so outside in front of the woman he loves, in a futile attempt to preserve what little humanity he has left. But his efforts prove wasted as he gives into his canine instincts, while Karen gives into her own depraved instincts by filming it, because that's what normal people do. Later that day, back at Karen's house, Pochita uses the fact that Karen can't understand him to say the words, "I love you," which he did not have the courage to say when he was human. Unfortunately, Karen may be a B word at times, but that doesn't mean she speaks dog, and Pochita's words only come out as incomprehensible barks. Suddenly, Karen's friend enters her room, which Pochita immediately recognizes as Nekotani, his classmate and next-door neighbor. And although Pochita doesn't understand why a top student like Karen would hang out with a bimbo like Nekotani, seeing them together makes him realize that if he can make Nekotani like him, then he can use her to return home, since they live next door to each other. And when Karen's mother conveniently calls her away, Pochita puts his plan in motion by going full dog mode and trying to act as cute as he can. Unfortunately for him, however, Nekotani is deathly afraid of dogs and immediately runs away from this vicious beast. But while freaking out about Pochita, a wild centipede appears and begins crawling on her. Pochita immediately tries to warn her with a bark, but this just frightens her even more. And as she runs away, she trips and scrapes her knee, and the centipede crawls inside her clothes. And with no other choice, the lucky mutt crawls in after the centipede and eventually kills it while trying to avoid Nekotani's plot mountains on his way back out. And despite being immediately yeeted away by Nekotani after she regains consciousness, he still decides to lick her boo-boo as a way to apologize to her, which makes Nekotani break out in a fit of laughter. But when Karen returns shortly after, Nekotani is frightened by the look of betrayal on her face. Pochita is also terrified, as Nekotani tries to explain that it's not what it looks like. Suddenly, Karen stubs her little toe against the wall on purpose, removes her sock, and orders Pochita to come lick her boo-boo as well. And even Nekotani has no idea what's going on anymore, And when Karen then confronts about what she did with Pochita while she was gone, Nekotani admits that Pochita crawled into her clothes. Infuriated by this, a jealous Karen orders Pochita to crawl into her dress too, which leaves Nekotani just as confused as you and I, as the lucky mutt reluctantly fulfills his owner's absurd request. But when the day finally comes to an end, Nekotani seems mostly unfazed by Karen's unhinged behavior, and seems to have somewhat gotten over her fear of dogs as she pets Pochita goodbye, which of course fills Karen with jealousy. And if you thought this anime couldn't get any more degenerate, the next day Karen cosplays as a dog to get closer to Pochita. She then pulls out a device that supposedly translates dog barks to Japanese, which Pochita obviously doesn't believe works. And when he barks and says he loves her, Karen is left completely shocked by the translation and falls to the floor as the device reads that she's weirder than someone who cosplays for dogs. Suddenly, Karen's mom walks in and asks her why she's wearing a dog cosplay, and Karen immediately pretends to be doing push-ups in order to save face, causing her mom to leave without saying anything. But Karen believes her mom totally bought this lie, while Pochita realizes again that she's got a couple screws loose. But when Karen then asks him if she's weird for liking unusual stuff, Pochita suddenly has a flashback to when he was a human, and remembers how he was a loner who only had one friend. But as he sees her run off and talk to another boy, he realizes that she's just his friend because she's the only other member of the gardening club. And that's when he meets Karen for the first time, who reassures him that there's nothing weird about liking plants, and that liking unusual stuff doesn't make you weird. And ever since that day, Pochita has had a crush on Karen. And when he barks again to try and tell her that she's not weird, Karen looks at the translation and smiles. Shortly after, Karen receives a call from Nekotani, inviting both her and Pochita over for a study session next weekend. The next day, Karen comes home completely exhausted and immediately falls asleep, which Pochita assumes is because she was out having fun with friends. But as he watches her sleep, he realizes that this is the perfect time to prepare his escape, as Pochita plans to use Karen's phone to deliver a package to Nekotani's house so he can escape to his own house when Nekotani answers the door. But as he tries to reach her phone, Karen grabs him in her sleep and hugs him tightly. But after some tactical licking, Pochita escapes her grasp and reaches her phone, and somehow successfully manages to deliver a package to Nekotani's house while using his paws. And while using Karen's phone, Pochita learns from her search history that she's been looking for part-time jobs so she can take better care of him, which he realizes is why she's been so exhausted lately. And upon seeing how much she cares for him, Pochita feels somewhat guilty to want to escape so badly. But as he covers her up, he strengthens his resolve to escape so he can someday be by her side as a human. And the next day, when they arrive at Nekotani's house, a jealous Karen makes Pochita promise not to get too close to Nekotani. But when they go in and Pochita sees that Nekotani is still afraid of him, he wonders why she asked Karen to bring him in the first place. Later that day, while the girls play video games, Pochita uses this time to prepare for his escape. And when the doorbell rings and the package finally arrives as expected, Pochita immediately, while Nekotani surprisingly chases after him. But Pochita soon realizes that he's too small to jump the railing, so with some quick thinking, he turns around and scares Nekotani onto her butt. And just as he planned, this scares her into throwing him off of her, and he miraculously lands through the window inside his room. But as he looks around his room, he's shocked to find Usagi, his only friend from the gardening club, and hides inside her dress to not be found. Which of course gives him a great view of her wonderful personality. However, as Usagi snoops around his room, she finds a heart-shaped box of chocolates, and immediately rips it apart while cursing out Pochita for accepting chocolates from another girl. She then cries out at how he's been missing for several days, which fills Pochita with regret. But Pochita is then completely shocked when Usagi suddenly begins using desk-kun to fill the hole that Pochita's disappearance has caused. Suddenly, Pochita's mother calls out to Usagi and thanks her for looking after her sons. But as she walks back home in the rain, Pochita decides to keep following her, as he realizes that his room had no clues on how to turn back human. Usagi soon spots him, however, and decides to pick him up and take him home with her, because something about him reminds her of Pochita's human self. Meanwhile, Karen and Nekotani desperately search in the rain for Pochita, but he can't seem to get their attention. And to make matters worse, as soon as Usagi arrives home, she collapses due to a fever from the rain. Needing to act quickly, Pochita fights off his embarrassment and rids Usagi of her wet clothes. And while he continues to help her, Usagi mumbles in her sleep about how she's so worried about Pochita's disappearance that she can't sleep at night, and how he's an idiot for never noticing that she only talked to other boys to make him jealous. But as he listens to her words, he finally realizes that she's in love with him. Meanwhile, Karen and Nekotani have been going door to door to ask about Pochita. But when they notice that Usagi's door is open, they enter, and are shocked to find Pochita with an undressed Usagi. This fills Pochita with fear, as he's frightened by what might happen when the girl in love with his dog self meets the girl in love with his human self. But Pochita suddenly gets another flashback to his time as a human, and remembers how a girl in a lab coat gave him Valentine's Day chocolates claiming they were from Karen, and he blacked out after eating some. When Pochita then wakes up from his flashback, he finds himself in Usagi's room, along with Nekotani and Karen, who furiously tries to reclaim her dog. However, Usagi is unfazed by Karen's enraged gaze, and calmly responds that Pochita in fact belongs to her. But when Karen is about to lose her mind and go on a murderous rampage, Nekotani intervenes, and suggests that they have a contest to determine who is Pochita's true owner. And as any reasonable person would do, the girls agree to open their legs, and the one whose skirt Pochita goes under will get to keep him. And Pochita, of course, moves towards Karen, but realizing that she's about to lose, Usagi grabs a dog bone to secretly lure Pochita towards her, which suddenly triggers Pochita's dog brain, causing him to automatically walk towards Usagi. Karen refuses to accept defeat, however, and the girls begin to angrily kick each other. But in the confusion, Pochita accidentally ends up under Usagi. And as Karen is completely heartbroken by this loss, Usagi celebrates her victory by dancing with Pochita, which eventually causes the bone to fall from under her skirt, and Nekotani declares Karen the true winner because Usagi cheated. And although Usagi accepts the outcome and apologizes for cheating, she also tells Karen that this isn't over, and swears she will someday make Pochita hers. The next day, as Karen gets ready to head to school, Pochita attempts to sneak into her bag so he can go to school with her and find out who the mysterious lab coat girl is. But Karen tells him that dogs aren't allowed in school. Pochita is desperate to get answers about the lab coat girl, however, and humiliates himself by doing a begging routine. But this thankfully works, as Karen gives in to his cute charms and sneaks him into school. Throughout the day, however, Pochita is surprised to learn that Karen eats lunch alone, and that she's completely cold to everyone, even the teacher, as she's only interested in staring at Pochita. But while the class is brainstorming ideas for an upcoming school festival, Pochita suddenly catches a glimpse of the girl in the lab coat and jumps out of Karen's bag. But he's immediately caught by the other students, who are enamored by his cuteness and give him belly rubs, while a furious Karen looks on coldly at Pochita for cheating on her. And while playing with Pochita, the class comes up with the idea to host a dog cafe for the school festival, a girl that asks who Pochita belongs to, which makes Karen suddenly shout beg for mommy. And not wanting to humiliate his crush, Pochita decides to himself instead by doing his begging routine. Overwhelmed by his cuteness, the girls then persuade Karen to bring Pochita to school again tomorrow, but she's not so thrilled about sharing him with others. Meanwhile, Usagi does her best Discord mod impression by creeping on them in a very discreet manner. The next day, the other students all bring their own dogs to school while setting up the dog cafe, and later that day, Nekotani shows Pochita a photo of her and Karen as children, happily with a dog, and says that he was the first Pochita. But ever since he died, Karen became cold, and only began smiling again around Pochita, while Nekotani was never able to make her smile like that. But as she continues talking to Pochita, she notes his unusual intelligence, and voices suspicions that he might actually be a human in a dog's body. But before Nekotani can continue her train of thought, a bunch of dogs suddenly appear behind her, causing her to run away in a panic, and eventually jumps in a pool to escape them. When Karen later catches up to Nekotani and Pochita, she's furious that the two of them were spending so much time together, and gets even more frustrated when Pochita's chimp brain prevents him from looking away as Nekotani changes out of her wet clothes, and Karen grabs his wagging tail as punishment. Later that day, while Karen is disappointed in her lackluster decorations, Pochita gets the brilliant idea to grab some paint and add paw prints to the paper chains, which greatly impresses the rest of the class. But as Pochita watches over Karen throughout the rest of the day, he starts to lose his resolve to return human, as he worries that Karen will become depressed if she loses another dog. Suddenly, Usagi appears in a bunny costume, and challenges Karen to see which of their classes makes the most money at the festival. And if Usagi wins, she'll get to do whatever she wants with Pochita for one whole day. But if Karen wins, Usagi will have to stay away from him from now on. And as the school festival finally kicks off, Karen is furious to see customers petting her beloved Pochita. Despite this, Pochita is surprised that the dog cafe doesn't have many guests, and Karen's classmates soon realize that Usagi's class is stealing their customers by tempting the girls with huggable bunnies, while tempting the boys with bangable honeys. In response, Karen comes up with an idea that only her deranged brain could conjure up, and suggests having the dogs lick the customer's bare feet. And this idea somehow becomes a hit among the female customers, because whoever made this anime desperately needs Jesus. Suddenly, the girl in the lab coat visits the dog cafe and asks Karen how she would react if she learned that her dog was actually a human. Karen, of course, shrugs this off as impossible, but when the lab coat girl insists that anything is possible, Karen becomes deeply perplexed by the question. Angered by the lab coat toying with his crush, Pochita follows her as she leaves, and she leads him into a creepy abandoned building, where she introduces herself as Inari, and congratulates Pochita for taking 5,113,927 seconds to get to this very moment since being turned into a dog, and promises to tell him how to become human again if he puts on a ball gag, which is actually a device that translates dog speech to Japanese, but a real one this time. Shortly after, however, Inari horrifies Pochita by revealing that she's been watching him this entire time, and has photos of everything that happened both inside and outside Karen's house, and calls Pochita a real piece of work for being so creative in his ability to reach plot. She then goes on to ask him if he's really willing to throw away such a blessed life, just to be human again, and without even questioning it, Pochita responds that he does, as he's determined to tell Karen that he loves her in his human form. Delighted by his answer, Inari pats him on the head and tells him that he really is the perfect guinea pig after all, and reveals that in order to turn human again, he just to ingest fluid containing another person's DNA, such as with a deep kiss. And when Pochita asks her why she turned him into a dog in the first place, Inari says her lips are sealed, and claims that telling him would ruin her experiment. Frustrated that Inari is treating all this like some kind of joke, Pochita shouts that he refuses to take Karen's first kiss as a dog, before breaking the translator and walking out with his little puppy head held high, as Inari watches on with a villainous smile. And after walking around school for a while, a worried Karen is ecstatic to find Pochita, and thanks him for helping with the dog cafe. She then kisses him, but he doesn't lick back. And despite remaining as a dog for now, Pochita continues to live a chaotic life with 3 crazy girls willing to do anything for his affection, but swears he will become human again someday. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe our channel. See you soon.